global car makers who are considered, top giants in the industry, top 5 global car manufacturers, Nissan, Volkswagen Group, and General Motors. They are in crisis, and they don't, well, at least many buyers of their cars don't realize. They don't realize that it's possible these companies could be forced into dire situations where, it sounds crazy, but bankruptcy is entirely possible, especially in the immediate future of companies like Nissan. Why is this possible? Am I just making this up? Well, having a look at this chart from China, you can see the evidence supports my theory, and that is that these companies have relied upon China for billions of dollars in profits and revenue, and those profits and revenue are very likely about to disappear. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. Great to have you with us. I want to say a big thank you to all of you for tuning in and supporting the electrification of the planet. Now, in light of that, let's support, if you can, if you're in Australia. If you're not in Australia, come along anyway. Come along to the Sydney EV show, which is actually on the 8th, 9th, and 10th of November. I'll be speaking there. I'll be giving a keynote and a few panels, and I'd love to see you there at the speech. Now, in addition to that, I will also be holding a get-together if you'd like to come along on the Sunday. So I'll have more details of that. If you want to send me an email, contact@theelectricviking.com. Global car makers, General Motors, Nissan, and the Volkswagen Group, and others such as BMW. BMW sales have fallen by 30% over the past month alone. They have long relied on getting billions of dollars in sales every year in China. Now, a lot of people think, well, it's China, surely they're not making that much money, but actually, the Volkswagen Group, for example, 50% of their profits over the last 5 years have come from China, 50%, and only 40% of their sales have come from China. Now, when I say only, it's still a big percentage, but 40% is a lot less than 50, and that means that, well, the Volkswagen Group has actually made more profit on its cars in China than it has selling cars anywhere else, including in Germany. As domestic competition surges, we now see that 75% of all cars sold by Chinese automakers are EVs and plug-in hybrids. The idea that foreign automakers could depart China entirely in the next 5 years is being discussed as a real possibility. I mentioned this on the channel when I started this channel 4 years ago, and in fact, that's what a lot of the channel was about. A lot of people have said that I was making things up, that I was some kind of trickster and I was just doing it for clicks. But interestingly, the WireChina.com says that actually, well, I just shared with you what they said. They just said the exact paragraph I explained to you a minute ago. That's directly from them. Now, Chinese analysts are saying what I've been saying for years. They're saying, actually, maybe the Electric Viking wasn't exaggerating after all. And why this is so important is because the Volkswagen Group and Toyota, they both have nearly $200 billion of debt. You've got to service that debt. And if 50% of your profits suddenly evaporate overnight, you can't pay your mortgage anymore. Like, how do you pay your home loan, right, when you lose your job? It's tough. There's only so long before you have to sell the business. Selling the business is even tougher, though. We know that because one of the Volkswagen Group's brands, Audi, they have tried to sell their flagship factory in, I believe it's in Belgium. There's been no takers. No one wanted it. What about Fisker? No one wanted it. It's very hard to sell. The Hyundai Group, they built a $1.4 billion flagship factory a few years ago in China. Well, after that, their sales tanked. And so they thought, well, we'll sell the factory and we'll at least recoup 50% of our investment into it. No one wanted it. It ended up selling for a fraction of the cost, around $200 million, when it cost more than $1.2 billion only a couple of years before that to manufacture. That means the so-called paper assets that companies like the Volkswagen Group, Nissan, General Motors, and Toyota have, the so-called book value of these companies is pretty much fabricated. It's basically worthless. When I say worthless, well, not worthless, but to give you some context, have a look at what Tesla paid for the factory that they bought from Toyota. They paid a mere fraction of the cost to manufacture that factory. In 2023, GM sold fewer cars in China than it sold in the United States for the first time since 2009, 15 years ago. As recently as 2017, General Motors sold more than 4 million cars in China. By the end of last year, that number had plunged by half. Germany's Volkswagen and Japan's Nissan are still selling more in China than in their home markets. But the gap has narrowed considerably. And as you can see from these declining numbers on these charts, the fall has been precipitous. There is no logical reason to believe that this fall won't continue, especially when there are so many good quality Chinese manufacturers who make compelling EVs and compelling plug-in hybrids willing to sell at lower prices for as long as it takes to get rid of legacy auto. A lot of them have basically signed an unofficial pact to eliminate them. If you don't believe me on that, have a look at the CEO of BYD, his comments, Wang Shanfu, about getting rid of legacy auto from China. He stated it is BYD's mission to eliminate them. What does that tell you? Well, that tells you it's probably inevitable. There are three things that explain the turnaround: the emerging strengths of the Chinese auto industry, the transition to new power sources such as EVs, plug-in hybrids, fuel cell vehicles, and last but not least, the weakness of the American automotive industry, particularly the big three, says Gregory Noble, Professor Emeritus at the University of Tokyo, referring to General Motors, Stellantis, formerly Chrysler, and the Ford Motor Company. Now, bizarrely, Gregory has mentioned fuel cell vehicles, which are hydrogen-powered vehicles, which have been a complete failure. That's part of the failure of Japan. Japan invested very heavily into hydrogen-powered vehicles, and all of that money has really just been a complete waste. Now, Japan wasn't the only place to invest in hydrogen. South Korea, Hyundai and Kia invested heavily into it as well, and so did General Motors. Much to a lot of people's surprise, General Motors, in fact, have invested billions of dollars into hydrogen. The declining fortunes of foreign automakers are largely down to the rise of domestic competitors, many of whom are ahead in producing better electric vehicles and adopting cutting-edge software. China's largest electric vehicle company, BYD, sold 420,000 cars in 2017. 420,000 cars for the entire year. In September, BYD sold more cars than their entire sales in 2017 in a single month. In December of this year, it's predicted BYD will sell more than 500,000 cars in a month. Now, intriguingly, 2017, when BYD was really just a small, tiny little player, General Motors reached their sales peak, their sales high in China. Things were going well. They were making billions of dollars in the country. By the end of 2023, BYD's annual sales had surpassed 3 million vehicles, and General Motors sales had begun to drop quickly. Domestic brands in China now account for 62% of vehicle sales in the country, compared to less than half of 2020. But if you include Tesla in these numbers, Tesla obviously manufactures electric cars in China, then that 62% jumps up to closer to 70%. The Chinese automakers, have the scale, they have the supply chains, they have the shipping, the vertical integration, they have built their own chips, said Michael Dunn, founder of Dunn Insights LLC, an automotive intelligence firm. Vertical integration refers to an automaker's control over almost all aspects of its supply chain, meaning the company can supply its own auto parts, computer chips, and EV batteries, says The Wire China. Some of that is subsidies, but it's not just subsidies. That's an important message. Dunn predicts that most of the world's biggest car companies will depart the Chinese market within the next 5 years. I think it's inevitable. We know that Jeep declared bankruptcy in China last year. Mitsubishi, they left China as well. If I'm a global automaker in China today, I would move as quickly as I can to wind down the joint ventures and establish a wholly owned entity in China for the purpose giving you the option to use it as a manufacturing base for the domestic Chinese market and also potentially as a manufacturing base for exports, says Dunn. Establishing a joint venture with a local Chinese partner was once a requirement for foreign automaker car companies to do business in the country, but the requirement was abolished in 2022, the same year that Tesla opened their Gigafactory. Tesla's Gigafactory is the only wholly owned automotive industry factory in China. The only one that's completely owned by a foreign car company. If you stay in the joint venture and make no changes, your exit is inevitable, he said. The growth of China's EV automakers has also impacted on China's domestic state-owned car companies. SAIC Motor, GM's major joint venture partner since 1997, earned around $40 billion in revenue in the first half of 2024. Sounds like a lot, but actually that's a 13% decrease from the same period last year. In contrast, says The Wire, BYD's revenue for the first half of 2024 was $43 billion, up by 16%. You can see the trends here, and they're not showing any sense of slowing down whatsoever. In fact, if anything, these trends are accelerating. Foreign automakers may have to sacrifice profitability if they are to regain market share to China. US EV manufacturer Tesla triggered a price war in China in late 2022 when it started discounting its vehicles. That war has intensified. The CEO of Xpeng says that the Chinese car market is literally a bloodbath, with automakers discounting cars at historic pace. How do you compete with that if you are a legacy automaker who only owns 50% of your joint venture car company? Here you can see some of the enormous discounts on vehicles in China. These numbers don't really show you the full story though, because the truth is that Audi and BMW have discounted some of their cars by up to 50% in China. Up to 50%. Even though these discounts have been steep, sales for legacy automakers continue to fall in the country. Sales for companies like the Geely Group, which own a number of different electric car brands, Chery, BYD, and even Tesla, have actually continued to grow. That trend is showing no sign of stopping anytime soon. Thanks for watching.